On the night of the 6th of June 1944, in the Sibutu Passage between Borneo and the southern Philippines, the Japanese destroyer Minazuki heeled hard over and turned to attack. Her lookouts had caught a low gray shape held on the surface in the moonlight, and her captain did the correct thing, the thing his training and his instruments were built for. He swung his bow toward the contact and drove in. A warship that has found a submarine on the surface is supposed to win that exchange. She is faster. She is armed for exactly this work. And the boat, to shoot back at all, is supposed to have to point herself at the oncoming hull and hold that heading while the range falls away. This one did not point at her. She was already turning away when the torpedoes left the tubes, and two of them ran out of the dark from a hull that was showing Minazuki her flank, and curved onto a collision course and struck amidships. She went down in 5 minutes. Some of her own depth charges let go as she sank, and she took most of her company with her, her captain among them. From her bridge in the last minute she had, the geometry of it would have made no sense at all. The shooter was turning one way and the target the other, and the water between them had produced a hit that, by every rule the Japanese Navy understood about how torpedoes were aimed, should not have been there. What made it possible was a calculator. Years before that night and an ocean away, the thing that sank Minazuki had begun as a problem in trigonometry. A submarine wants to strike a moving ship with a weapon that runs in a straight line at a fixed speed. To do it, the boat has to aim not at where the ship is, but at where it will be when the torpedo arrives. It has to allow for its own hull moving through the water as it fires. It has to allow, too, for the torpedo swinging onto a fresh heading once it is running by means of a gyroscope carried in its own body. Do all of that by hand on paper, under pressure. In the few seconds a firing window stays open, and errors creep in at every step. Beginning around 1932, working with the Ford Instrument Company and the Arma Corporation, the United States Navy set out to hand the whole sum to a machine. What came of it was an electromechanical analog computer, a cabinet of brass and steel packed with gears, cams, hand cranks, and the spinning electrical repeaters called synchros. By the early years of the war, it had grown into the Mark III, and it lived in the cramped attack center of the conning tower, tended by two men who did nothing else. One section was the position keeper. It took the boat's own course and speed straight from the gyro compass and the log, and it drew the enemy ship's course, speed, range, and angle from the periscope or the radar, and from all of that it held a running picture of where the target sat and where it was heading. The machine did not solve the problem once and stop. It solved it over and over, revising as both vessels moved, so the fire control party could read the current answer off its dials at any instant. It even watched for the enemy to turn. When a ship zigged hard enough that the tracking went stale, the panel warned the operators that the picture had to be built again. The instrument knew when it no longer knew, which is a rare and useful thing in a weapon. The second section, the angle solver, took that running picture and worked out the gyro angle each torpedo would need to reach the meeting point. Here, the machine did the thing no other Navy of the war could match. It sent those angles down to the torpedo rooms and set them electrically into the weapons while they still lay in their tubes, and it kept resetting them as the situation changed, across both rooms and every tube at once. The submarine no longer had to aim herself. She could steer wherever the fight demanded, toward the danger or away from it, and the torpedoes in her tubes stayed pointed at the mark the whole time, their gyros taking in the new angles second by second. Britain had a device for the job, a compact angle solver the crews called the fruit machine. Germany and Japan had their own arrangements, all of them simpler, and most produced a firing angle that then had to be cranked into the torpedo by hand. That difference sounds small and was not. A handset boat still had to be steered onto a firing course and held there while the setters worked. The American instrument alone tracked the target in real time and aimed the weapons in real time. A submarine twisting away from a pair of escorts, throwing her rudder over, changing depth and heading to stay alive, could fire in the middle of that maneuver and still expect to hit, because the sum never stopped and the torpedoes never lost the mark. Skippers came to favor small gyro angles. A shot close to straight ahead kept the solution tightest and the torpedoes run short, and it forgave the small errors that crept into any firing. What Minazuki met was that same machine used the other way, holding a solution through a hard turn. The man who carried that instrument into the Cebu Passage was Commander Samuel Dealey. His boat was the submarine Harder. By the summer of 1944, the two of them had a reputation that ran out ahead of them. On an earlier patrol off the Carolines, a destroyer named Ikazuchi had come hunting and closed to point-blank range before Dealey turned the exchange around and sank her. He sent afterward one of the flattest contact reports of the war, that he had expended 4 torpedoes and 1 enemy destroyer. It sounds like bravado. Read against the machine, it is closer to a description of method. A warship bearing down on a submarine for all its menace is a narrowing and steadily more predictable problem. Its range is closing, its bearing settles, its course is committed, and its choices fall away with every length it advances. A boat that could hold a firing solution through its own hard turns did not have to flee that kind of problem. It could stay inside it and work it out. Harder cleared Fremantle in the last week of May 1944 on her 5th war patrol, and her orders were not chiefly about destroyers at all. She was to work the waters near Tawi-Tawi, the anchorage off the northeast tip of Borneo, where the Japanese fleet had gathered, because it sat close to the oil it could no longer easily carry home. She was to land, and later recover, a party of coast watchers on the Borneo coast. Above all, she was to watch that anchorage and report what came out of it, because the American command needed to know the hour the enemy fleet sortied for the battle building in the Philippine Sea. Dealey was sent there to see past the screen, not to fight it. The escorts were in the way. He did not throw the boat at every one of them, and this matters because the legend tends to flatten it. More than once, he studied a setup he disliked and pulled off, taking the report instead of the attack. The steadiness in the record is not nerve alone. It came from knowing which problems the instrument could solve and which lay outside it, and from the discipline to decline the second kind. The ones he took, the machine solved. The night of the 6th brought Minazuki, caught while Harder ran on the surface toward a convoy of tankers and pinned by the moon before she reached a firing position. A second escort was screening the same convoy, and as she closed, the submarine came around and fired her full bow battery. Every one of those torpedoes missed. The instrument was not sorcery, and Dealey never pretended it was. The escort drove Harder deep and held her down long enough for the tankers to slip away into the dark. Both halves of that night belonged together. The clean stern shot gets remembered, and the wasted spread does not. And the version most people carry keeps the first triumph while quietly losing the second failure. The man himself kept both. On the morning of the 7th, a Japanese aircraft found the boat and vectored the destroyer Hayanami in to finish her. This time the geometry was the head-on kind, the enemy charging straight down the bearing, and Dealey used the shot that became his signature. He fired straight up her throat and dove. Hayanami took a hit near a magazine and came apart, going down by the stern, and the submarine passed under the falling wreck as it settled past her. On the evening of the 8th, several destroyers came sweeping for her in line abreast. Dealey waited. He worked the boat into a spot where 2 of them overlapped along a single bearing, then fired one spread at the pair. The lead torpedo ran ahead and missed. The next 2 struck Tanaka's square along the waterline, and her boilers let go in a single white flash that opened the hull and finished her almost before the sound of it reached the submarine. Beyond her, Dealey saw a second, blinding detonation and reported it as another destroyer sunk. He was credited with it during the war. That last ship is the one honest seam in the record, and it should be named as one. 3 destroyers, Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanakaze, are confirmed in Japanese accounts and can be pointed to by name. The wartime credit was 5. The difference takes in that far detonation on the 8th, which matches no enemy loss anyone has since found, and a warship combed by Harder's torpedoes off a passing task force 2 days later, thought sunk at the time, but in fact, steering clear and living on. A tally made through a periscope in the middle of a fight is a sincere count. The sea did not always return a clear answer to what a flash had meant. What the enemy made of all this is the sharpest part of the story. They did not have the instrument. Lacking it, they could not readily picture what it did, and so they fell back on the only explanation that fit the pattern of screening ships going down one after another around a single anchorage. In their picture of a submarine attack, a boat that meant to hit turned toward its target and committed to a firing course, and its intention showed plainly in its heading. Harder did not behave that way. She struck from a turn, from the flank, from angles that kept shifting, doing a thing their own fire control could not manage, and their own doctrine had never described. Across 3 nights, one submarine had sunk their screening warships around Tawi-Tawi, and the command drew the conclusion the evidence seemed to force on them. They decided they faced a pack. A squadron of American boats, they reasoned, had gotten in among the escorts, and the anchorage was no longer safe. One boat, one commander, and one calculator had made a threat the enemy could account for only by multiplying the boat that caused it. The contact report Harder sent on the fleet that finally sortied from Tawi-Tawi reached the American command and fed straight into the plans for the Philippine Sea. That fleet was the one the American carriers met days later, in the battle that broke Japanese naval air power for good. The screen off the anchorage had been the last thing standing between the watchers and that news, and it had been cleared with an economy that unsettled the men on the far side of it. The instrument outlived the patrol. Harder herself was lost 2 months on. She sailed again in August, her 6th war patrol, and on the 24th she was working a screen off the Philippine coast in Dasol Bay. What is known of her end is known almost wholly from the other side. A small Japanese escort ran down a sonar contact and laid a pattern of depth charges, and afterward its crew reported oil, debris, and cork insulation rising to the surface. Later study, setting the Japanese anti-submarine records against the American loss data, put it that Harder had made a close attack that missed, was caught in the counterattack, and was forced under, below the depth her hull could bear. There were no survivors. Not one man of her company came home to say what happened in the conning tower in those last minutes, whether the fire control party stood at the instrument, whether a live solution still sat on its dials when the charges came down. How Harder hit the ships she hit can be reconstructed almost to the second. How she was lost cannot be traced with anything near that confidence, because the only witnesses were the men dropping the charges, and the men who could have answered stayed with the boat. The calculator that made her attacks clear enough to diagram left nothing behind to account for her last hour. The calculator that aimed Harder's torpedoes is one of a dozen quiet machines that decided battles and never earned a name of their own. Subscribe, and the next one gets pulled up out of the footnotes.